For that introduction and welcome. And thank you for having me here today to talk about this very important topic of stigma and of mental health in the workplace. So destigmatizing mental health concerns and improving supports and seeking out better solutions is more important now than ever, as we're well aware of what we've been seeing in the news. So before we get started, I'm going to have Jean Marie put up a poll. See if I can see this poll.
I am launching it now.
Okay.
Of course, it said something went wrong. Please try again.
It worked.
Give me just a second. Let me try and launch it one more time. All right, for some reason, it is not allowing me to launch it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
maybe it just came up.
Oh, there it goes. All right. So the question is there room in the workplace for conversations about mental health? And the answers to this are anonymous, so don't worry about your answer. So before you put your answer, I'm only asking for a yes, no, or a maybe. So really seriously think about how you would feel if you had a mental health issue and you wanted to disclose it in your place of work. Would you feel comfortable doing that? So is there room in the workplace for conversations about mental health? So I'm going to give everybody a minute to answer that. I see some people are saying yes. 30 more seconds. Does it look like it's slowing down?
Yes. Yes, it does. It looks like it's kind of done.
Okay, so great. So I find it interesting that 60, it looks like around 60% of everyone thinks that yes, there's definitely room in the workplace for these types of conversations. And we had about 30% that were kind of on the fence and just a few no's. So this poll was actually put up in LinkedIn. And the interesting thing is I pulled randomly several responses and I've included them in this presentation. So I apologize that I'm going to sit and read these to you, but I know that they're kind of small for some people. So I want to show the range of responses that I actually pulled when I pulled these randomly. So the first one, this is something I avoided in the past, but have had better relationships with my management after being more open with. Next one. As an individual who has always worn my heart on my sleeve, the growth in my career was always impeded by my natural tendency to speak frankly and openly about mental health. Talking about mental health in the banking and finance industry was generally not well tolerated and definitely not a catalyst for self promotion and advancement. Another response. I wish my former employer had this. Some will recognize my name. I was one of the most successful Volvo salesperson in the US. I left the business for what I recently was when I was recently diagnosed with severe PTSD I received during combat. Talking with my psychologist revealed that if I had someone to talk to about this, I would not have left. I or nobody during my time with Volvo would ever had any clue of why I reacted the way I did to certain situations. I am now learning to deal and cope with these situations better and now know why I react the way I did. So yes, there should be someone to speak with that represents the employee and not the employer. Another one. In my opinion, the day that mental health stops being held against a person is the day we should start talking about it in the office. This is most unfortunate, but until then, I'm fearful that anyone who admits they ever spoke to a counselor or took an antidepressant might get labeled as a defective, crazy freak. It's so unfair, and this needs to change. Why is it that we are allowed to be sick from the neck down and to ask for the prayers of others, but people sick from the neck up must whisper and often go without the support they need? I hope that maybe someday mental illness will be disclosed the same way as someone who discloses they are diabetic. The stigma of mental health needs to go. I stopped, but that was a really long response. Next one. Given the research I read, I would tell someone to take careful stock of the workplace culture before disclosing their mental health concerns at work. They should analyze the risks and rewards of doing so. It isn't fair or right, but it's realistic. Some people may have their job put at risk if they disclose. Thought that was interesting. And finally, many companies have resources to help with mental health. I don't feel it's appropriate to discuss in the workplace and can create a lot of stress for managers not knowing how to handle the situation. Companies should make the resources readily available and train managers how to discuss the resources with their teams versus trying to discuss the mental health issues with their teams. It's not a good place to have someone do the unthinkable and you blame yourself because you knew it was a possibility but didn't have the knowledge to prevent it. So the important thing about that one is indicates that managers are struggling with this. How do they handle this? So we're going to talk about this during this presentation. All right, so before we move on and talk about why it's important to understand mental health, I want to bring up two important terms that have to do with self-disclosure. And when I'm talking about self-disclosure in the general sense. So when people talk about self-disclosure, they bring up two words that they experience. One is vulnerability, and the other one is shame. Interesting. So now I'm going to read the definition of vulnerability. According to the dictionary, vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Interesting. Attacked or harmed. But yet people associate that with self-disclosure. The next one, shame. A painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or fooling behavior. So now we're associating it's self-disclosure with being either wrong behavior or foolish behavior. That's interesting as well. Think about it. All right. That being said, why is it important that we understand mental health? Well, as we see in the news, mental health problems are quite common. But even though they're more common and celebrities are talking about it more, there's still a lot of stigma that's associated with having mental health issues. And one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, especially during and I don't know if we're quite post-COVID yet, but during COVID has been the fact that professional help is not easy to find. Our providers in the community are taxed, even our inpatient settings are full. So it's not always easy to get the help that people need. But on top of that, a lot of people suffer in silence. The majority of individuals that really need mental health help don't seek it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And another big issue is that people don't really understand mental health problems and they don't know how to respond. So one of the examples of that was one of my employees who is a licensed provider. He told me one day that he was in CVS picking up a prescription or something, and there was an individual there who was starting to escalate with his behavior, became very loud, and then he yelled out, well, I'm just going to kill myself, or something to that realm. And he said that not a single person responded. Like nobody in CVS responded. Everybody just got quiet, kind of stared at him and didn't really know what to say or do. I thought that was very interesting. That nobody responded to him. Now, he being the kind person that he is, did sit down and talk with that person. Oh, you're having a hard time hearing me?
I'm just trying to make Dr. Moser's volume louder here, folks.
Thank you. We had a couple of people who were having trouble hearing you, so I asked Jackie if she could help make you louder.
All right.
So just keep on going. I'm gonna type over your shoulder.
All right. I'm going to try my best to keep going here. It's a little
Sorry, guys.
distracting. All right. So let's move on then. Oops, maybe not.
No, you're fine.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Don't know that I can until you're done with that.
Oh, it won't forward for you?
No. I do it here with. Oh,
There we
there
go.
it goes. Okay. So what is a mental disorder? A mental disorder is a mental illness. It's a diagnosable illness that affects how we think. I'll talk louder, by the way. How we think, how we feel, and how we behave. So it's a mental illness that affects our whole well-being, and it disrupts our lives. It disrupts our ability to function at work, at school, to carry out daily activities. Thank you. I hope you can hear me better now. And to engage in satisfying relationships. So mental disorders affect our entire life. So I have a feeling I skipped something. Hold on. Okay, no, I didn't. Okay, so why is it important that we address mental health in the workplace? All right, well, that's a good question. 1 in 5 adults, and by the way, it's the same for children as well, 1 in 5 youth experience a mental health disorder in a given year. 1 in 5, that's a significant amount. That's 20% of our population every year. Most of these adults, this 20%, are employed. So it's a high percentage of these adults that are employed. So a recent study found that 42% of individuals reported a decline in mental health since the pandemic began. So that's 42% since the pandemic began. And then 8 out of 10 employees will not seek help or support due to stigma. So 80% of people who are suffering in the workplace with mental health issues are not seeking help. That's a pretty high percentage. And many individuals will suffer in silence for fear of losing their job and or their reputation. So people are not feeling safe. So what happens when we don't treat mental health conditions in the workplace? Well, our mind-body connection is pretty strong. So people, when we don't address the emotional issues, they manifest themselves physically. So we are going to see a significant increase in physical issues with our employees. And the annual cost of that is about 113 billion. That's pretty high. And what are the results? The results are an unstable workforce. We have a lot of turnover, a lot of people leaving, a lot of people leaving the field or our company if our environment is not and our culture is not safe for that. So what is stigma exactly? So stigma is considered shame associated with needing mental health support. It's an attitude of fear or disapproval that's targeted to a specific group of people, in this case, people with mental health issues. The definition, excuse me, is a level of shame, prejudice, or discrimination toward people with mental health or substance use conditions. Mental health conditions are often viewed or treated differently from other chronic conditions. So we heard in the earlier part when I read those quotes from people on LinkedIn, like the one individual stated, why can't we treat mental health the same way we treat physical health? Why can't it be safe for us to talk about it? They are treated differently. What's the result of the stigma? It can lead to poor self-esteem, poor quality of life, reduced productivity, physical decompensation, as we said earlier. So I want to talk about 3 different kinds of stigma. Self-stigma is the internalizing, the devaluing that we place on ourselves due to other people's stereotypes. So, and this can disrupt our sense of self. It can cause us to isolate from others. Public stigma, of course, is the discrimination and devaluation by other people about mental health. And that can also lead to isolation. And then finally, specific to workplace or systemic stigma. And that's the discrimination that a person who has mental health problems is not going to be productive or successful at work. So people always ask me, especially managers and people in leadership, so how do I identify when somebody might be experiencing a mental health problem if they're not willing, to come to me and talk to me about it? So I tried to simplify this by saying there's one main thing to look for, and that is a change in the person's functioning, whether it's their thinking, their emotional state, their behavior. But it's a change, whether it's at work, at school, in relationships, in their activities. So you may notice that you have an employee who often came into work on time and was, dressed appropriately and professionally, and then all of a sudden they're coming in late and they look disheveled. They don't appear to be taking showers. That's an indication. Somebody who was always very conscientious about their work and then doesn't seem to care, shows some apathy, a person who's not taking care of their physical well-being. So any kind of change can indicate that there's something going on. All right, so let's move on to what do we do about this? Okay, how do we destigmatize mental health? All right, so I'm going to talk about 3 different areas. The one is shift, okay, shifting perspective, and that's going to be a really key important one. A second one is eliminating discriminating behavior. So we have a lot of DEI programs going on, but do we include mental health as one of those? And we'll talk about that more. And then finally, access, or making it easy for people to access the help they need. Let's talk about the shift in perspective first. How do we shift perspective? Well, the first thing that we need to do is cultivate a culture of psychological safety. What is psychological safety? So it's when people feel comfortable being their authentic selves at work, as well as being able to speak up about their concerns without consequences. So a lot of people, some people do work in a culture that they feel safe doing those things, but some people don't. So job safety allows somebody to feel, to recover and heal from mental health problems. So it's important to keep that in mind. I want to have you think about a scenario. So you can close your eyes if you want to, or you can keep them open, whatever works. But imagine that you're walking alone in the dark, that you've just come out of the building. It's pitch black dark out. You're not really sure where you are. And you're walking down the street. You're looking around. You hear strange sounds. So put in the chat how you might be feeling right now. Scared, afraid. Yeah, nervous, anxious, scared, lost. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't feel very safe, does it? Feels really, really scary, really anxiety provoking. You're not sure what, if something's going to happen to you. All right, now close your eyes again and imagine this scenario. You've come out of that same building. It's still just as dark, pitch black dark out. You're starting down that street. You feel that anxiety, that nervousness. But then one of your coworkers walks out and stands next to you and says, "Hey, let's walk together." Now, how do you feel? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Safer. Secure, strength in numbers, yes. Not as scared, relieved, safe, included, less afraid. Absolutely. So do you see the difference? The only difference between the scenario 1 and scenario 2 was that you had somebody by your side, somebody that you worked with who appeared to understand that what you were going through and maybe even share that same anxiety with you. And together you were walking through there feeling much more comfortable, much more safe. So that's the difference in what we're talking about in unsafe culture versus a safe culture. All right, communication. Communication is important in authentic or creating a shift in perspective. Communication involves authentic leadership, which builds trust and improves performance. So if you, and I'm sure you can all think back about times when you had a boss who was very, very disconnected and how that felt to you. Like it almost felt like you had to protect yourself all the time, right? You know, it doesn't feel real comfortable. You're certainly not going to self-disclose in an environment like that. So authentic leadership is when a person feels, when their leadership, when the leader feels comfortable being their own self, their own comfortable self at work, same as at work that they would at home. So I once was talking to a manager and she told me she works very, very hard. And she said to me, you know, I don't disclose any personal information at work. And I have a huge separation between my work and my home. And I get that, you know, professionalism, whatever. But it was to the extreme. And so I said to her, wow, you must be extremely exhausted when you come home from work. And she said, oh, yes, you know, I am. And I said, well, you know, my hope for you that would be that sometime in the future you would be able to be the same person at work that you are at home. And I bet you wouldn't feel as exhausted. So that authenticity it spreads and it causes the people around you to also feel safe. Um, when one the next one, and practice emotional intelligence. Okay, what is emotional intelligence? So there are four factors that I consider an emotional intelligence. One is self-management. That's the ability to manage your own emotions in a healthy way. Okay. So when we talk about self-disclosure, I'm not talking about somebody who's constantly talking about their personal issues and that is draining all the people around them. Those are what I call energy drainers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being authentic, showing that it's okay to struggle at times, but still be very effective at your work. So self-management is when you can manage your own emotions in a healthy way. Self-awareness is when you can recognize how your own emotions impact others. Okay. And it might impact the thoughts and behaviors of others. Yourself, I'm sorry. So self-awareness is recognizing how your own emotions impact your own thoughts and behaviors. Social awareness, I got ahead of myself, is how your emotional behaviors impact others. Okay, so self-awareness involves being able to pick up emotional cues from other people, understanding the emotions and needs and concerns of others. So far we're talking about self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, and finally relation management, or the ability to develop and maintain relationships. So practicing that emotional intelligence is important. Modeling healthy behaviors. What do we mean by that? Well, taking time off, taking vacations when you need to, having a work-life balance. When your supervisor is at work before you come in the morning and after you leave in the evening, how do you feel? Yeah, you sometimes don't necessarily feel comfortable about working your hours and having your work-life balance. So once again, modeling healthy behaviors, talking the talk and walking the walk. Language. Okay, so watching oh my gosh, that person's crazy, stay away from them. They're an addict or they're this, like labeling people with negative words rather than saying, you know, that person struggles with some issues. I'm not exactly sure what they might be, but they do a great job at work. Okay. Routine check-ins. As you can do this as a coworker, as a leader, it doesn't really matter. Hey, how you doing today? How's it going? So when I have my team meetings, I often will take some time to say, how's everyone doing? And some people do disclose the things that they're struggling with because we know they're still functioning. We know they're still going to work and they're still doing their jobs, but they still are struggling. Now, I'm going to give you an example of one of these, how I saw one of these, this work in front of a lot of people. So I was asked to be in a panel of mental health experts, and it was to this huge group of HR human resource leaders. There were four of us in the panel. Three of us worked in mental health, and the fourth person worked in HR, human resources, and she was a top executive. So as we were talking in this panel, this woman proceeded to tell the whole group about how she had had an emotional breakdown and had actually been hospitalized for mental health issues. Wow, that's a big self-disclosure, right? Here she was, this top performing individual who had completely fallen apart to the point where she needed to go into an inpatient mental health facility to stabilize. The interesting thing about that from that panel was that the majority of people from that point forward wanted to talk to her. So the questions were being asked about her. At the end, everybody went up to talk to her. So her self-disclosure made people feel safer, comfortable. Okay, so I wanted to throw that out there. So listening to others. I once recently had an employee walk by my office, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" "I'm fine." "Are you?" So I listened to the tone, and then I pulled them in and said, "Are you really okay? Let's talk about that." Okay, and finally, communicating mental health resources. What do we have out there, both in the community and in our own organization? And we will talk more about that when we talk about access. So another part of shifting perspective is education, okay? Education is important. Mental health first aid, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about that, or mental health 101. It's where we teach the basics of mental health issues. It's important that we get that word out there. What is mental health? What does it look like? What do we do when we're put in the situation where somebody is struggling with it? Okay, normalizing mental health concerns. It's okay to have anxiety. It's okay to have depression, and it doesn't mean that you can't do your job. Another one, a big one, is training our leaders to notice signs and symptoms. So not too long ago, we were doing a training with some managers about when it's appropriate to send somebody for a mandatory referral to the employee assistance program. And in that training, we did a role play. And the role play was that one person obviously was the team member. And then we pulled a manager who was willing to be a victim and volunteer to play the manager role. Well, the team member or the employee started talking about how they had shown up or were struggling with addiction issues, and then even came to the point where they admitted that they had come into work intoxicated. Well, during the role play, the manager literally just stopped and looked at us and said, "I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know what to do." Like, she did not know. And in the discussion afterwards, none of them really knew what do you do with this. So training our leaders on noticing signs and symptoms, but also knowing what to do with it. Include training in the onboarding process of new employees is important. Maybe teaching a mental health 101 when you onboard new employees. And then, of course, ongoing mental health education, webinars, different things like that you can teach people about different mental health issues, just like this. And another thing that companies can do is mental health awareness campaigns. And this, oftentimes companies will do this during like Mental Health Awareness Month, or where they kind of bombard the company with a lot of mental health information. So what does that involve? It involves trainings, workshops, education, resources, and then of course bringing mental health professionals into the workplace. Whether they have them in the room and somebody can just come in and talk to them, or whether you have them doing presentations on different mental health issues. So let's move on to the second part of our destigmatizing, and that's eliminating discrimination. So I'm sure, well, we know that a lot of companies, I know BayCare is doing this, has the DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And their focus is on that. But it's important that when we do those trainings, that we also think about mental health. So individuals who don't match the majority identity do end up facing additional challenges because they feel excluded and invisible. So yes, our minorities feel that way as well, and we really want to work hard on eliminating that within our companies. But another side to this is also people with mental health problems. And how do we do that? Well, we include that in our DEI training. We do, and it's important that we do be very careful about our language, as we discussed earlier, that we don't turn people crazy. I recall, and I always ask this question in orientation, and almost everybody raises their hand when I say, how many of you were standing outside your house talking to a neighbor or a few neighbors, when one of the neighbors turns to you and says, oh my gosh, stay away from that neighbor, they are crazy. What do they mean by that? Okay, interesting. Valuing psychological safety. Now, we talked earlier about what it feels to be safe in your work culture. So valuing that, and then treating mental health more like physical health. It is something that someone has that can be treated. Okay, so finally, the last part of this is access. Okay, how do we make it easy for people to access help? Well, of course, I'm going to always push the employee assistance programs, being the director of the assistance programs at BayCare. But employee assistance programs are the best way for people to access help easily and readily. So I'm sure that hopefully all companies have employee assistance programs. So, and if not, please give us a call and we'll talk to you about that. But having those resources available, whether it's through an online resource center or through counseling or through trainings or webinars or online programs. And then a digital app is a wonderful way to access some help. And there's so many of them that we see advertised now. Talkspace, and there's a bunch of different ones. Wellness programs, mind, body, spirit, treating the whole person, mind, body, spirit. So wellness programs are just an amazing way to help individuals be healthy all around. And then finally, educating our leadership. Like how can we teach our leadership to be more comfortable talking about mental health? Seeing the difference when somebody is having mental health problems, knowing when to formally refer someone for help versus mandatory referral for help. What do we do when somebody doesn't appear fit to work anymore? They're going through something so traumatic that they're not able to function at work. What do we do with that? So educating our leadership on how to handle types of situations. All right. So that being said, does anyone have any questions?
I am going to stop the recording here. So give me just a second.